Hey everybody, well this is probably the last video that I'm going to shoot here in Nicaragua with Pastor David's help. He's behind the camera and I'm on this side of it. Part of what I wanted to do while we were here is simply do our discussion video. This is really our sermon follow-up video or our home group discussion video because I won't be home in time to do this with Pastor Kyle, so I'm really just kind of doing this solo, and then we will provide it for you guys as home group leaders and individuals who want to use it to help you along the way. This particular Sunday is an important one because we wrap up our series on giving or on money. Overflow is the title. And so I put some questions there. You'll have them, hopefully as a group, as a discussion group, you'll have those questions. But I wanted to take a few minutes and talk about them because it is such an important subject that we are tackling this week and the previous 2 weeks. And so the first thing is you'll notice on your questions, the first thing is what are some situations where 10% feels like a lot? And what are some situations when it feels like not very much? I think this is really interesting because we look at certain things in the area of 10% and think, well, that's not any really big deal. Maybe you think about giving 10% of your time. That's maybe I could do that. Or maybe you might even think an amount of money that you have in your mind. There's a lot, 10% of $1,000 is kind of a lot, $100, but 10% of $100 is only $10, and that sort of changes. So sometimes the sheer number itself feels like a lot or a little. So as you're talking with your groups, just really allow people to be creative. What are some things that feel like a lot, and what are some things that don't really feel like very much? But as we'll find out, the word tithe means 10. It means a tenth, and so it's kind of interesting to kind of play back and forth. What is it that feels like a lot, and what is it that feels like a little when you discuss it in terms of 10%? So that's really all that first question is meant to help you do. The second question is, does planned giving, whether it's a tithe, 10%, or some other number that you have determined, but you have planned to give a certain amount, does that remove the need for faith? I think if there's anything that you would come away with from this series, it is that it's faith that pleases the Lord. So when we give, we want to give in faith. And so the question really is just about the subject of planned giving, like we budget or we plan to have this amount that we give, which 10% is a very planned number. It's a very fixed number. If you were to stay with a tithe or a 10%, that's a number that you can plan off of in a way. And so does that remove faith, or is it a risk that it removes faith? And that's something that really would love for you and your group to discuss on how do you maintain faith while planning to give, and kind of making it a very structured, or however you handle giving, or however your group members handle giving. That's kind of the idea behind it. The third question says, how should someone who typically tithes view the other 90%? I think this will be a really great question that you can ask your group or the members of your group. If tithe is a very natural way of giving, we kind of plan for something like that. Does it change the way we view the other 90%? I think if we're honest, we would say quite often it does. We think once we have met that 10% mark, if that's sort of what you believe, that a tithe is still in effect today, and the New Testament, if you feel like there's still the component of tithing, then a lot of times we do that and we take away the need to think about the other 90. And a lot of what this sermon series has been about is to turn that a bit and to understand that the 10%, even in the Old Testament, was always meant to be everything. Right? It was always meant to suggest, even an Old Testament saint was always looking for that first 10% to indicate this is all yours, God, and that's certainly what we have reiterated each week. So it's just an interesting thing. How should someone who looks at giving 10%, how should they view the other 90? And you guys can talk about that as a group. And then the last official question, or the question that you'll find on your sheet, is, what are some reasons why the church is an appropriate place to start one's regular giving? We talked about this on Sunday, but allow each other to kind of discuss why do we give to the church, and whether that's an official tithe like a 10% or some portion, or a certain amount, again, that is planned ahead of time. Why is the church a good place, an appropriate place to begin that giving? It is important to think about what are the needs of the congregation, what are the needs that the congregation has in order to assemble, in order to be unified. That's a reasonable thing to discuss. It's a reasonable thing for the church to wrestle with. How do we show our commitment to this body of people? And part of that is through giving. And so just kind of discussing why it is an appropriate place to really start that act of giving. And again, you'll draw some from the sermon, and you'll draw some maybe just through the discussion in your own group. At the end of your discussion questions, I list any other questions. It's not specific. There are a lot of questions that we talk about on Sunday, and so using those questions to just keep the conversation going. You'll probably have more than enough questions. There are these 4 that I've given you on the discussion sheet, but really you can go back to the sermon and you can probably get another 6 or 8 that we're going to talk about in the message, and you can just add that to your discussion. So that's really the intent of that final point, is use whatever question to keep the conversation going and to really draw people out. You know, I don't know how many times I'm going to be able to do a discussion video like this where I am in the beauty of Nicaragua, to be sitting out. This is our last night here before we head home, and just to think about all that God has done on this trip. The last week has been an amazing experience for me, I think for Pastor David, as well as for the folks that we are working with, and I know it means a lot to you. We've tried to capture a number of things on video, and so it's just really a lot of fun to be able to shoot this final video on the discussion questions to keep our energy and our enthusiasm about Nicaragua and really all of our global ministries, to keep that at the forefront of our minds. It goes right hand in hand with the subject of giving, with the subject of money, of generosity. All of those topics really come to fruition right here in Nicaragua, and what a great joy it is to talk about it right here where I am before we head home. So thanks for watching. If there's anything more that we can do, we will definitely be praying for you and love to help you along the way as you talk about these things. Thanks.
Say goodbye in Spanish.
Adios, gloria a Dios y Dios le bendiga. Which, yeah.